Reflecting on my mornings, they were always filled with routine thoughts, but nothing stood out more than the time I spent with my family. My work week was often chaotic and overwhelming, but weekends were sacred. They were my chance to focus on what mattered most, time with my daughter and mother. Saturdays became my beacon of hope amidst the busyness. Growing up, family was a constant foundation. My dad always reminded me that work wasn't everything, and that it's the small moments with loved ones that truly shape us. I carried that lesson into my own life. The thought of laughter-filled afternoons with my family kept me grounded, even if I didn't realize it at the time. As I started my day, my mind was already on the weekend. It was Friday, and with just one more day of work, I was excited for the time I'd spend with my 4-year-old daughter, Emma, and my mom. My wife, Rachel, was traveling for work and wouldn't be back until Sunday night, so it was just me and Emma. After dropping her off at kindergarten, I headed to work, expecting to finish updating a course catalog by noon, but surprisingly, I was done by 10:30. When I got home to an empty house, I realized I had a few hours before picking Emma up. I grabbed a sandwich and began packing for the weekend. While juggling my sandwich and packing, I knocked over a shampoo bottle that rolled under the bed. When I reached for it, my hand brushed against a small book, Rachel's journal. I hesitated, unsure if I should read it, but curiosity got the better of me. The journal entry was from April 15, 2008. Rachel wrote about feeling trapped and fearing the consequences of her actions. She described how her boss accused her of mishandling money from the account she managed, and then offered her a way out if she became his personal assistant. My heart raced as I read further, shaken by her raw honesty. She explained how her boss, Mr. Grayson, offered her a new position with more pay and responsibility, promising to help her out of the financial mess. He assured her she wouldn't be handling money anymore and could repay him over time. It seemed like a lifeline, so she took it, hoping it would fix everything. I leaned back, trying to process her words. Rachel had kept all of this from me. She went on to describe how Mr. Grayson planned to cover for the missing money by claiming it was found in another account, clearing her name. When she told me about her promotion, she left out the part about the financial trouble, wanting to handle it on her own. As I turned the page, things got worse. Rachel wrote about moving into her new office next to Mr. Grayson's private lounge and how co-workers started giving her strange looks. Rumors began to spread about her role. Then, Mr. Grayson called her into his office to explain her new duties. Along with typical assistant tasks, he expected her to accompany him to events and dress according to his standards. The dread inside me grew. Rachel recounted how Mr. Grayson insisted she wear shorter skirts and no pantyhose or bra, saying it was important to represent him and the company well. If she refused, he threatened to end their agreement and expose her for the missing money. I could barely keep reading. Rachel reluctantly complied, showing up to work the next day in a revealing outfit. Mr. Grayson called her in to inspect her appearance, even asking if she was wearing a bra. She confirmed she wasn't, and I felt sick. This wasn't the woman I knew, and yet, she was trapped in this nightmare. Her journal went on to detail how the wardrobe inspections became a daily routine. By the next week, Mr. Grayson pushed things further, demanding that she strip in his office. Each day, his demands grew darker. By Friday, he had her completely undressed for his inspection. I could barely process what I was reading. Rachel had been suffering through this nightmare, and I had no idea. Her words described the pain she endured, and how each day she felt more trapped. She wrote about how Mr. Grayson eventually demanded even more from her, threatening our daughter, Emma, if she refused. He told her she had no choice, and after much pressure, she gave in to his demands. Tears filled my eyes as I read on. She explained how, one evening, Mr. Grayson made even more vile threats, and she felt she had no way out. She mentioned how she thought about telling me but was afraid of the consequences. So, she chose to deal with it herself. I could barely believe it. This was the nightmare Rachel had been living through, and I hadn't seen any of it. My heart broke as I read how she had been forced into these impossible situations, all while trying to protect me and our family. I had no choice, Rachel wrote, describing how everything spiraled out of control. She had been forced to serve other executives, becoming nothing more than an object passed around. James told me I was now available to all the higher-ups and potential clients. I had become the company's personal plaything. I sat on the edge of the bed, stunned, trying to process everything. My wife, Rachel, the woman I loved and trusted, reduced to this. Her journal continued, "I'm writing this to document how I became the Thompson Corporation's office hooker. Maybe one day, this record will help me escape. I know David would leave me and take Emma if he found out. I hate myself for hurting him, but I was manipulated. I didn't see it until it was too late. Now I'm in so deep, there's no stopping it. All I want is to protect David and Emma. God help me and forgive me." The overwhelming betrayal and loss hit me like a tidal wave. Rachel had been manipulated and trapped, trying desperately to protect us all, while keeping this devastating secret. I closed the journal, suddenly noticing that my shirt was soaked with tears I hadn't even realized I was shedding. Anger and pain surged inside me. I wanted to scream, punch something, maybe even confront James, or, worst of all, Rachel herself. But at the same time, I felt numb, like I was the one drowning. Without thinking, I stumbled into the bathroom and vomited up the peanut butter and jelly sandwich I'd eaten earlier. After rinsing my face, I went back to the bedroom and straightened the wedding picture I had accidentally knocked over. I stared at Rachel's smiling face in the photo, remembering how she used to seem like a princess to me. I touched the glass, trying to reconcile the woman I knew with the woman in the journal. Just as I reopened the journal, the phone rang. It was Emma's school. I had completely lost track of time. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said, feeling the guilt wash over me again. I quickly gathered my things, threw them into the car, and rushed over. When Emma saw me, her initial frustration melted away, and she gave me a tight hug. A tear slipped down my cheek as I held her close. I decided to take the long way to my mom's house to clear my head. By the time we arrived, Emma was asleep in the back seat. So I carried her inside and tucked her into bed. I told my mom I'd start working on her to-do list. Ever since Dad passed away, I'd been the one to help her around the house. That evening, I worked late, cutting branches in the backyard, my mind consumed by what I had read. Tears kept slipping down my face as I tried to process it all. I had only read a single journal entry from nearly a year ago. If this started back then, what more was I about to uncover? As darkness fell, Mom came outside and sat next to me. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. I broke down in her arms, crying like I hadn't in years. Once I finally calmed down, I confessed. "I found out something about Rachel, something that makes me think we can't stay together. I'm so angry, but I still love her. I know I need to do something, but I don't know if I'm strong enough." In her usual calm way, Mom replied, "David, you're a good man. You'll do the right thing, whether that's forgiving her or deciding to move on. Just remember, whatever you choose, don't let Emma get hurt. She needs her father more than ever. And know that I'm always here for you." Her words gave me something to hold on to. "Thanks, Mom. I'll make sure Emma isn't hurt." We walked back inside together, and I went to check on Emma. She was sound asleep, her little hands curled into fists. March 15th, 2008, Saturday. I barely slept that night, my mind churning. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling a pit of dread in my stomach. From downstairs, I could smell Mom's fried apples. "Morning," I said, walking into the kitchen. "Morning," she replied, giving me a knowing look. "I could hear you tossing and turning all night. Just eat and figure it out." After finishing breakfast, I asked, "Could you watch Emma today? I need to go to the old spot by the river. I won't do anything reckless, I just need time to think." She hesitated but nodded. "Of course, but be careful. Emma and I will have a good day." After lunch, I finished up the tasks I had promised to do around the house, grabbed Rachel's journal and a couple of beers, and headed to the riverbank where I used to go as a kid. It was always my escape, my quiet place to clear my mind. Sitting there now, I opened the journal again and took a long sip of beer. The entries listed the men Rachel had been with, how many times, and what they had done. Occasionally, she added notes about how good it felt or how numb she had become. Her tone became more casual as the entries went on, but the content was horrifying. Then I reached an entry from October 20th, 2007. This past week was unbelievable. On Friday, James said we were giving out bonuses to the salesmen. On Monday, we visited the regional office, and after giving them their bonuses, he told the guys their extra reward was 2 hours with me. My stomach twisted. I had to force myself to keep reading. We went to the hotel, and one by one, they came in. The first man and I had sex. The second only wanted oral. By the third guy, I was exhausted. When the department manager arrived, I was completely drained. That night, I slept with James, too. Rachel went on, describing how the rest of the week followed the same pattern. By the end of it, she had been with multiple men and had even been paid $400 for her extra services. Her words, "I enjoyed it," made my fists clench as I continued reading. She described how, despite feeling some level of pleasure, she felt immense guilt afterward, like she was two different people. One version of herself was the obedient employee who did what was required of her, and the other was a loving wife and mother. She admitted to feeling numb while at work, but full of regret and disgust once she was home. "I've become nothing more than a hooker," she wrote. It was painful to read how Rachel had split her life in two, switching between the nightmare she endured at work and the life she built with our family. All the while, she carried this unbearable burden alone. I set the journal down and stared out at the river gorge, briefly thinking that this spot would be a perfect place to end it all. But then it hit me. Why should I suffer for what James Grayson and Rachel did? They were the ones who caused this mess, not me. Rachel's writing sounded less remorseful and more like she had enjoyed everything she was doing. Did she enjoy it more than being with me? I'd have to ask her when she got back. By Sunday, I decided I would confront her. If she lied or refused to tell me the truth, I'd take Emma and move in with Mom. Divorce would be too easy for what she had done to us. And on Monday, I would deal with James. As I read more of Rachel's journal, it became a catalog of her exploits. She described a manager's only Christmas party, a New Year's event where over 20 people, both men and women, had used her, entertaining clients throughout the year, and even sleeping with local law enforcement in exchange for company favors. She also described a wild management retreat where she performed alongside dancers in ways no one would ever forget. It was as though she had split into two people, the loving wife and mother at home, and someone I didn't recognize at all at work. Her last entry had been written just a week ago, which meant she was probably at it again this weekend. I couldn't read anymore. I closed the journal, leaned over the gorge, and threw up. Then I lay back in the grass and cried, overwhelmed with disgust, anger, and misery. How could I have been so blind? Looking back, maybe there were signs, but I never doubted Rachel. She always told me when something was wrong. Maybe, in her mind, this wasn't a problem. We never fought. She did her part at home and was an amazing mother to Emma. Sure, our physical relationship had slowed, but I chalked it up to her demanding job. Now, I wondered how many times I had been unknowingly betrayed. Rachel had always been easily manipulated by men. Her father controlled her until she went to college, and then she dated a man who used her emotionally and sexually, tossing her aside when he was done. I met her after she had been fired from a restaurant where the owner had secretly been filming her in the bathroom. She was too trusting, especially with men, and I hadn't paid enough attention to the men around her. Hindsight really does suck. March 16, 2008, Sunday. As we left Mom's house, she walked us to the car. "David, let me know what happens," she said softly. "And don't do anything reckless. I trust you'll figure it out." I love Rachel, but if even half of what I read is true, she's not the same person, I replied. "But you're right. I'll make sure Emma doesn't get hurt." Mom nodded. "I'll be here for you, no matter what." I thanked her and got into the car. Emma and I spent the afternoon playing in the backyard. By the time she went to bed, she was exhausted. I sat alone, nursing a beer, waiting for Rachel to return. At 9 p.m., the door opened and she walked in, carrying her suitcase. "Hi, honey. How was your weekend? Did Emma behave?" she asked with a smile. I looked at her, the rage simmering just beneath the surface. "Not as good as yours, I imagine. I only got screwed by one person. You probably had dozens." She froze, her expression shifting to shock. "What are you talking about? I worked all weekend. And now I come home to this? I grabbed the journal from the table and threw it across the room. It hit the china cabinet, the glass shattering. Rachel stood there, stunned, staring at the wreckage before slowly picking up the journal from the floor. Without a word, she walked outside. I watched from the window as she sat on the porch swing, clutching the journal and crying. I left her alone and opened another beer. When she finally came back inside, she sat across from me, placing the journal on the table. Her face was red, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Now you know," she said in a broken voice. "What are you going to do?" "I haven't decided yet," I replied coldly, "but it's going to be big." "Are you going to divorce me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Like I said, I don't know yet." Rachel stared down at the table, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm almost relieved you found out. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you or Emma. I'm so tired of the lies, the manipulation, the control. I just want to go back to being a normal mom. I'm sorry, David, for everything. Please talk to me." I felt a mixture of anger and pity. "I read your journal," I said, my voice heavy. "I only have one question. Was this weekend more of the same?" She lowered her head. "Yes," she admitted. I clenched my jaw. "Did you do it voluntarily? Did you enjoy it?" She hesitated, staring at the table. "It was a management retreat. I had to be there." "That's not what I asked. Did you enjoy it? Did you want to do it? Because from what I read, it seems like you were really into it. Maybe more than with me." "No," she said quickly. "I didn't enjoy it more than being with you. It's just different. I love you, David. I never wanted to hurt you. I do enjoy the attention and the sex, but it's different with you. We make love. With them, it's just sex." Her voice cracked, and she hesitated. "No matter what I say, I sound like a lying, cheating whore. And I am. I won't deny that I enjoyed it with others, but I hated lying to you. Is that what you wanted to hear?" I took a deep breath, unsure of what I wanted to hear. "I don't know, but at least you're not lying anymore. I don't think you could lie your way out of this." We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Rachel asked in a small voice, "So, is there still an us?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I don't see how. You chose this life over your family. I've been lied to for months. You abandoned Emma and me for your so-called clients. No, there's no us anymore. That ended the moment you got on your knees for James Grayson." Rachel collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I added, "And speaking of James Grayson, I'm going with you on Monday. I'm going to beat the hell out of him while you clear out your desk. He may have blackmailed you, but you chose to stay in this nightmare. Everyone involved deserves to pay, and I'll start with him." I paused, letting my anger simmer. You know, during the Cold War, they had a term called nuclear response, swift and devastating retaliation. If I could, I'd shove an atom bomb up Grayson's back and press the button. I want everyone responsible to pay, and I don't care about collateral damage. But for now, I'll settle for knocking the life out of him on Monday. Rachel looked at me, her face pale. "David, don't do something reckless. He's powerful and will ruin you just like he did me." I stood my ground. "Monday, one way or another, I'll end this. Now get out of my sight. You can sleep in the guest room from now on." Rachel ran from the room, sobbing, slamming the door to the guest bedroom behind her. I grabbed a couple more beers, knowing I wouldn't sleep. If I couldn't rest, I'd at least drink until I passed out. March 17th, 2008, Monday. Rachel sat silently beside me as I drove her to work. She had cried all night. I could hear her through the thin walls every time I got up. When we arrived, her employee badge got us past security. She went to her office, and I marched straight toward Grayson's, ready to tear him apart. Before I could get far, two enormous men grabbed me. One seized me by the neck, slamming me onto the floor, while the other pinned my arms. No matter how hard I struggled, I couldn't move. Grayson appeared in the doorway, smiling smugly. "I've been expecting you," he said, crouching down beside me. "The guards called the moment you entered the building. These two are my personal security. They'll do whatever I ask, including breaking your neck or finding your daughter." My heart raced. As for Rachel, he sneered, She's mine now. My personal plaything. Try anything, and you won't live to see Emma's 5th birthday. I could barely breathe through the rage and the crushing weight on top of me. I wanted to destroy him, but I was outnumbered and helpless. Grayson leaned in closer. "Let me show you how powerless you really are," he whispered. He called for Rachel, and her trembling voice came from the doorway. "Please, James, don't hurt him. Please, no." "Shut up and get over here," Grayson barked. "Let's show your husband what you do for us." The guards lifted me into a chair, cuffing my hands and feet, and gagged me. I was forced to watch, trapped and enraged. "Rachel, strip," Grayson demanded. She hesitated, glancing at me, but when he whispered something in her ear, she began unbuttoning her blouse, tears streaming down her face. I struggled against the restraints, but there was no escaping. Then, everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed, and 4 in my arm and my right arm in a cast. My jaw throbbed, and I could only see out of one eye. The chief of police entered the room, smiling as he approached. "How are you, Mr. Johnson?" he asked. "We found your car in a ditch. It looked like you swerved to avoid a deer." "That's the official story, anyway. But we both know better, don't we?" He leaned closer, his tone darkening. "Lloyd Grayson's my brother-in-law. He's helped me out before, and I've enjoyed a few privileges. When he called about you, falling down the stairs, I took care of it. That's why you ended up off the road." He paused, letting the threat sink in. "If you don't go along with our version of events, I'll make your life a living hell. Pills will show up at your house, and I'll make sure you lose everything. And if you talk, well, you know what will happen to Emma. Got it?" I tried to speak, but my jaw was wired shut. All I could do was glare at him. He patted my shoulder with a smirk and left the room. March 19th, 2008, Wednesday. Rachel drove me home, helping me inside and into bed. I had a broken arm, a wired jaw, cracked ribs, and bruises everywhere. I needed help, but I didn't want hers. I hadn't seen her since the incident in Grayson's office, and now she silently took me home. I didn't ask where she had been or what she had been doing. I didn't care anymore. Neither of us spoke. She just looked broken. Emma, sweet and oblivious, helped me whenever I needed something. I couldn't talk or eat, just lay there, listening to the silence and letting my anger fester. I waited for my body to heal, knowing what I had to do when the time came. March 22nd, 2008, Saturday. I had managed to make my way to the living room by myself around 6 p.m. when the door opened. Rachel came in, followed by the 2 men who had beaten me and Grayson himself. He placed a small gift bag next to me. "A little get-well gift," he said, grinning. "Some DVDs to watch while you recover. I'm sure you'll enjoy them just as much as we enjoyed making them." Rachel stared at the floor, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Rachel, get me something to drink and stay in the kitchen until I call you," Grayson ordered. She obeyed without a word. He sat across from me, leaning forward. "Here's how this is going to go, David. Rachel will continue working for me, but now she'll be available on evenings and weekends too. She'll go where I tell her and do what I want. If you so much as think about causing trouble, you know what'll happen. Maybe even worse than what you've already experienced. So, be a good little husband, stay quiet, and don't make waves." I glared at him, hatred burning through every inch of me. "Good," he said with a satisfied smile. "We understand each other." He paused, then asked, "Anything you want to say?" With difficulty, I managed to mumble, "Your goons stopped me from saying what I really think." Grayson leaned back, amused. "Oh, don't worry about them," he said mockingly. "Speak your mind." I quoted, "I must not only punish but punish with impunity." Grayson looked confused, frowning. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Speak plainly," he snapped. "I'm going to make you, and everyone else, pay for what you've done. I'll get you all, mark my words." Grayson leaned in, smirking. "How are you going to do that? You can't even protect your wife." He called Rachel back into the room, taunting her. "Your husband here thinks he's a hero. Isn't that cute?" Then, turning to her, he said, "You've got an appointment at the Crown Plaza with a client. Go get ready." Rachel went upstairs, looking broken, while Grayson patted me on the head before leaving with his guards. An hour later, she came back down, dressed beautifully, but with sadness etched into her face. "I have to go. I don't know when I'll be back," she said quietly. "David, I'm sorry for everything. I never thought this would be our life. I love you and don't want to see you get hurt. I'll try to make a deal with James so you can take Emma and leave. Please, don't do anything drastic until I see what I can do. I don't want them to hurt you again." Before she left, she asked, "What did you mean by that quote you told James?" "It's from The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe," I explained. "It means I will get my revenge on everyone who's wronged me, swiftly and silently." Rachel stared at me, her eyes filled with tears, knowing I meant her too. "I still love you," she whispered. "I hope one day we can heal and be a family again. I want to believe that." She bowed her head and left. She didn't come home that night. In fact, she didn't come home for many nights. By Tuesday, the bag of DVDs Grayson had left was still sitting next to the chair, untouched. I had no interest in watching them. I already knew what she had been doing. I'd read enough in her journal. Rachel told me it was all against her will, but she'd also admitted to enjoying some of it. She lied, cheated, and hurt me, but I no longer cared about the details. All I wanted now was revenge, on everyone involved, including her. Going back to the way things were was impossible. I calmly hid the DVDs in the back of the closet, out of sight, but kept them for later. April 27th, 2008, Sunday. My injuries were healing. The bandages were off, and I could eat with only mild discomfort. Rachel came home early in the morning, around 6 a.m., fully clothed but completely exhausted. She collapsed into bed without saying a word, something she'd been doing a lot lately. She was barely around these days, and I'd been keeping track of her comings and goings, still planning my revenge. I had a plan, one that would take down everyone responsible for my suffering, Rachel included. I knew deep down that she was a victim too, but I didn't care anymore. She continued living this life willingly, choosing her work over her family. There was no chance of forgiveness. I didn't want her near me anymore. That evening, I was sitting by Emma's swing set when Rachel came outside. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, barely looking at her. She sat at the picnic table nearby. "I've been really busy. I'm sorry for everything. I miss you and Emma. I know you probably don't care about me anymore, but I still care about you. I haven't been able to get you out of this situation because James wants us to keep pretending like we're a happy couple. How are you holding up?" I didn't want to talk or be near her. "I'll survive," I muttered, keeping my distance. Rachel hesitated, then asked, "Have you been keeping up with the journal?" "I've read it. It's important, but I can't tell you why yet." "Yeah, I've kept it up, best I could," I replied coldly. "Is it still under the nightstand?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Yes." She nodded, then asked, "Would you like something to eat?" Tears filled her eyes as she said, "That's the first normal thing you've said to me since this all started." I sighed. "Yes, I'd like something to eat." For the first time in over a month, we sat down together as a family. Rachel, Emma, and I shared dinner, but I knew this wasn't real. We were just three people in the same house, pretending for a moment, and I knew it wouldn't last. April 28th, 2008, Monday. I lay in bed, reviewing my plan. It was perfect. Once it was set in motion, I would be free of Rachel, free of Grayson, and I wouldn't have to worry about them anymore. Rachel would face the consequences of her actions, and I could take Emma and start fresh. Everyone who took advantage of Rachel, everyone who caused me pain, would suffer. I made a call. May 7th, 2008, Wednesday. Rachel came home looking disheveled as usual, her hair a mess, makeup smudged, and clothes hastily thrown on. Sometimes her shirt would be buttoned wrong, and once she even came home without a blouse, claiming she lost it. She waved at me and went upstairs to shower. When she came back downstairs, I told her, "James called. He wants you to go to the Hilton and meet someone named Manny." Rachel paused, then said, "Next time, tell him I'm not his messenger. I'm done with this." I handed her the note and returned to my chair. She left without another word. I sat in the dark, tears welling up despite myself. The beer wasn't helping. May 24th, 2008 Saturday. I heard Rachel throwing up in the bathroom. When she came downstairs, she looked pale and weak. "David, I'm really sick," she said. "I've got a fever, sore throat, body aches. I think it's the flu. I don't want you or Emma to catch it, so please stay away." "Go back to bed," I replied. "I'll take care of Emma and get you some medicine." Rachel nodded and shuffled back upstairs. As I watched her go, I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity, just cold resolve. I took Emma out for ice cream and stopped by the pharmacy on the way home. May 30th, 2008 Friday. I got up to take Emma to school, but Rachel had already left. It was her first time out since getting sick. Whether the flu had finally passed or Grayson had forced her back to work, I didn't know. Either way, I kept up appearances as the devoted husband, not wanting another hospital visit. December 25th, 2008, Thursday. Summer and fall came and went, with Rachel working harder than ever. She was often gone for days at a time, looking thinner and more worn out each time I saw her. We barely spoke. When she did spend time with Emma, she would smile briefly, but it never lasted long. Christmas was quiet. Emma was thrilled with her new Barbie dolls and accessories, while Rachel gave me a gold pen and pencil set, even though I had told her not to get me anything. I didn't get her a gift. In the afternoon, Emma and I went to my mom's for dinner. Rachel wasn't welcome. Mom knew everything and refused to speak to her. If she could have, she would have strangled Rachel herself. We had a nice dinner, and Emma was delighted with the Barbie doll my mom had bought her. But I felt nothing, just numb. February 13th, 2009 Friday. I was at my desk updating the course catalog when a man I didn't recognize knocked on my office door. "Mr. Johnson? David Johnson?" he asked. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" "I'm Detective Archer from the state police. Is your wife, Rachel Johnson?" "Yes, that's right. What's going on?" "Sir, I regret to inform you that your wife has been killed. I can explain on the way to the hospital. We need to leave now." I stood there, stunned, unable to move or speak. The detective gently took the phone from my hand and said, "Sir, I'm very sorry for your loss, but we need to go. Can I notify someone for you?" I need to tell my boss, and someone has to pick up my daughter from school. I can't think." Between the two of us, we managed to contact my boss and arrange for a neighbor to pick up Emma. Then the detective drove me to the hospital, explaining what had happened along the way. "Mr. Johnson, your wife's boss attacked her at work. Witnesses say he struck her repeatedly with a heavy object. Some co-workers pulled him off, but she never regained consciousness and died on the way to the hospital. We don't know the motive yet, but the investigation is ongoing. Do you have any information that might help us?" I just stared out the window, my mind spinning. How would I tell Emma? At the hospital, I didn't have to view Rachel's body. Witnesses had already identified her. Instead, I was given paperwork to fill out regarding her remains. As I signed the forms, I noticed I was using the pen she had given me for Christmas. Once everything was finalized, I tossed the pen into the trash and sat in the waiting room, numb, staring blankly at the TV. The detective drove me back to work to get my car, and I picked up Emma from school. That night, I made her dinner, put her to bed, and called my mom to tell her about Rachel. Afterward, I sat alone with a beer, feeling nothing. February 16th, 2009, Monday. I took the day off to arrange Rachel's cremation. Mom came with me because I wasn't sure I could handle it alone. She had moved in on Saturday to help with Emma and me, saying she would stay until things settled down. I never intended for Rachel to die like that. My plan was only to get away, to make her face the consequences of her choices. Now, I had to live with her death on my conscience. When we got home, I went straight to bed. For the first time since all of this began, I slept peacefully. No dreams, just silence. February 18th, 2009, Wednesday. I was packing up Rachel's belongings from the guest room when I found her journal again. Skimming through it, I hoped to find something that might give me more insight into her life with Grayson, or how she really felt about everything. But it was just more of the same. More entries about her affairs, more lies. I pulled out Detective Archer's card and called him. "Detective Archer," he answered. "This is David Johnson. I found something important, Rachel's journal." You need to see it. Actually, I was about to call you, he said. There's been a major development in the case. Can I stop by this afternoon, around 2? That's fine, I replied. At 2:15, Detective Archer arrived. I introduced him to my mom, who had moved in to help with Emma, and we sat in the living room with coffee and cookies. Mr. Johnson, the detective began. There's been a significant development. James Grayson was granted bail at $1 million on Monday. However, that night, his wife shot and killed him. I was stunned but stayed silent as he continued. The reason she killed him is directly tied to the next thing you need to know. Your wife tested positive for HIV. I froze, the room spinning. I didn't know, I whispered. The state health department will want to test you and your daughter. I also need to ask, when was the last time you had relations with your wife? It's been over a year, I admitted. We separated in March, but we stayed in the same house for Emma's sake. We weren't together anymore. Understood. But you'll still need to be tested, Archer said. Now, can you tell me why you separated? It's all in here, I said, handing him Rachel's journal. I also found these DVDs, showing everything. She admitted to seeing other people when I confronted her, but I didn't know the full extent of it until now. The journal lays it all out. Her affairs with Grayson and many others. I don't want it in the house, I said, referring to Rachel's journal. Detective Archer glanced at the journal, his eyes widening as he realized the significance of its contents. This will be helpful, he said. The health department will need a copy to track down everyone she was involved with. We could have a larger health crisis on our hands than we originally thought. He added, the case against Grayson is closed now that he's dead, but his wife claims she contracted HIV from him. Based on what I've read in the journal, it's likely that he got it from your wife. So far, 3 people have tested positive, and we're only just starting. I sat in silence as his words sank in. There's one more thing, he continued. We found hundreds of DVDs in Grayson's office, showing your wife with other men and women. Between her journal and the videos, we should be able to track down everyone and get them tested. I stared at him, feeling tears welling up but refusing to let them fall. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, Archer said. I'll stay in touch. After he left, Mom turned to me. David, you weren't entirely honest with him. You knew what Rachel was doing last year, and you didn't tell the police everything. I couldn't, Mom. I didn't want the police to think I couldn't stand up to her. I did confront Grayson, and it landed me in the hospital. I was afraid that doing or saying more would put Emma at risk. Did Rachel threaten Emma? She asked. No, I replied, but Grayson did. He said if I told anyone, Emma would be hurt badly. I couldn't take that chance, so I stayed quiet. Mom nodded, understanding. What you went through this past year must have been hell, but I'm glad you protected Emma. I did what I had to do, I said quietly, hating myself for the choices I'd made. But I knew it wasn't over yet. This is just the beginning. March 9th, 2009, Monday. Detective Archer stopped by to tell me that the investigation into Rachel's death had officially been closed. He also handed me a copy of the health department's preliminary report, revealing the situation was worse than anyone expected. The HIV outbreak linked to Rachel could involve hundreds of people. The health department referred to it as an HIV hotspot, while the local papers called it the Thompson epidemic. No matter what it was called, it was a serious outbreak, with Rachel and Thompson Corporation at the center of it. The report outlined the following. Rachel had been involved with 411 identified individuals. There were others they couldn't trace. All of the identified partners had been contacted and tested. Of those, 36 people tested positive for HIV. The department was still tracking down other partners those 411 people might have had. Due to HIV's incubation period, it could take 9 to 12 months to fully understand the outbreak's extent. They had yet to determine how Rachel contracted the virus in the first place. What wasn't in the report, but I knew personally, was that Emma and I had both tested negative. A small relief amidst the chaos. All but one manager at Thompson tested positive, and as a result, the corporate office shut down the local branch and laid off the staff. The newspapers somehow obtained the health department's findings, and the story turned into a media frenzy. Every paper in the state reported on the surge in demand for HIV testing, and doctors' offices were overwhelmed with appointments. While only the health department had the names of the 411 individuals involved, some people came forward to the press, spinning exaggerated stories about their suffering. Most of it was nonsense, but they pinned the blame squarely on Rachel. Even national news outlets picked up the story, and reporters descended on our town. I disconnected my phone because of all the threats. Mom took Emma to school each day, as the school had barred me from entering the grounds, labeling me a health concern. Reporters showed up at my door regularly, looking for an exclusive. I stopped answering. I still went to work, but the constant stares and whispers made it unbearable. I did my job quietly and left as soon as I could. Life was a nightmare, and it wasn't getting any better. April 2nd, 2009, Thursday. I got a call from my insurance company, informing me they had settled Rachel's life insurance claim. I could pick up the check on Monday at the local office. Emma was the beneficiary of her $1 million policy, which was a small consolation in the grand scheme of things. Yesterday, I met with a local attorney who urged me to sue Thompson Corporation for Rachel's wrongful death. He explained that I had a strong legal case and believed I could win. I didn't know much about the law, but I told him to go ahead. I had nothing left to lose. He also suggested filing lawsuits against the 411 individuals listed in Rachel's journal. He admitted it was a long shot to get money from them, but at the very least, their names would become public record. Since the health department had kept the names confidential, he said Rachel's journal could be used as the basis for the lawsuits. I agreed. If nothing else, the publicity would damage everyone involved, and I wanted to sit back and watch it all unfold. June 15th, 2009, Monday. Today, my attorney and I met with Thompson's lawyer. After giving my deposition the previous week, they had more questions, some of which were very personal. I answered their questions carefully, following the script my attorney had prepared for me. By the end of the meeting, they made a lowball offer, $500,000 to settle out of court. My attorney wasn't impressed but stayed composed, delivering a few legal threats and acting as if we were ready to walk away. After some back and forth, he leaned over and whispered, "Their first offer means there's more. We can push them higher. Let's hold out." For over an hour, we haggled. Eventually, I agreed to settle for $1.5 million. Naturally, my attorney took a big cut, but that was expected. As we walked out, he grinned. This will make the other 411 lawsuits easier to settle. We should clean up nicely. When he said we, it was obvious who would benefit the most. December 25th, 2009, Friday. Emma and I spent Christmas at Mom's, far away from the chaos of everything else. The holidays were quiet for me and Mom, but Emma was happy. She'd grown out of Barbies and was into video games now, eager to show off her new console. As the day went on, I floated the idea of moving once the lawsuits were wrapped up. I was thinking of starting fresh somewhere distant, where no one knew our story. Mom liked the idea and mentioned she might even join us. I told her I'd start looking for places as soon as I could. December 31st, 2009, Thursday. Today was a turning point. Two big things happened that marked a shift in my life. First, we finally settled the last of the 411 lawsuits. Here's how it broke down. I agreed to settle 244 lawsuits for relatively small amounts. I dropped 99 of them for personal reasons. 11 were dismissed by the courts entirely. 5 were thrown out due to technical loopholes. 46 were dismissed due to the defendant's financial hardship or health-related issues. 6 cases went to trial, and I won them all, securing significant awards. Altogether, I ended up with about $1.4 million from the settlements, though my lawyer took a hefty chunk of that. The second event, I sold my house. I let it go quietly, selling it as is to a real estate agent for a fraction of its worth. The money wasn't what mattered. I just wanted to escape. At the closing, I told the agent, "It's your house now. I've got a few things left, but tomorrow Goodwill will come for everything else, furniture, kitchen stuff, all of it. I'm not taking anything. Too many memories." I added, "A cleaning crew will come by tomorrow afternoon to get the place ready. I've already moved out what matters. Take whatever you want before Goodwill gets here. By tomorrow night, we'll be long gone, and I don't care if no one ever remembers we were here." January 1st, 2010, Friday. As I drove away, I glanced at Emma in the back seat, sound asleep, surrounded by her toys. The morning newspaper lay beside me, with a headline about a local reporter being nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for covering the Thompson epidemic. At least someone's getting something out of all this, I muttered to myself. A few days earlier, the same paper had reported the latest updates. The number of confirmed HIV cases had risen from 36 to 54. Another 107 people tested positive, likely because they had been involved with those connected to Rachel. One of the managers at Thompson, who had slept with Rachel, infected his wife and 2 of his mistresses. Nearly 200 divorce cases had been filed as a direct result of the revelations from the lawsuits. Over 150 domestic violence calls had been linked to the fallout. 72 restraining orders were issued by spouses of the 411 individuals involved. The state health department predicted healthcare costs for the infected would surpass $50 million. All 12 executive managers, along with 6 department heads and 23 employees, were fired from Thompson, including the entire security team. The police chief and 2 officers tested positive and were also let go. So far, no one had developed full-blown AIDS. Investigators still hadn't determined when or how Rachel contracted the virus. 2 people had been murdered, and 2 others had taken their own lives. There was still 1,000 miles to go before we reached our new home. I couldn't help but think of the old saying, when one door closes, another opens. June 17, 2010, Thursday. For years, I'd convinced myself that Rachel had destroyed my ability to feel anything. But lately, I'd caught myself smiling, mostly at things Emma would say or do. She was the only reason I'd made it this far. I loved her more than anything. As long as she was with me, I felt like I could make it through. But not today. I stood outside a funeral home, hands jammed in my pockets, staring at the white door. Inside were the ashes of my oldest friend. We'd been born on the same day, gone through life together, shared everything. We were like brothers, learning about life and love, even losing our virginity on the same camping trip. He with Sherry Marks, and me with Donna Barnett. But as we grew older, life pulled us in different directions. We stayed in touch, but never as close as we had been in those early days. And now, he was gone, and I was too scared to walk through that door. The thought of facing everyone inside made me sick. I didn't want to fall apart in front of all those people, so I just stood there, paralyzed. As I wrestled with my nerves, the door creaked open, and I looked up to see Mrs. Polino, his mother, standing there with a gentle smile on her face. I hadn't seen her in almost 12 years, and despite a few extra pounds and some silver in her long black hair, she looked almost exactly as I remembered, still beautiful. When I was a teenager, I used to lie in bed at night thinking about her, imagining her long hair flowing over her tan shoulders, framing her delicate face. Her eyes were mesmerizing, and her smile could light up any room or make my adolescent worries fade away. I was infatuated with her, even though I knew it was wrong. After all, she was my best friend's mother, the same friend whose ashes now sat just beyond the door she was holding open for me. Despite her warm smile, I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the ground as I looked down, silently wishing the earth would swallow me up. Then I felt her presence close to me, her warmth radiating as she stood just inches away. I looked up and saw her kind brown eyes and that same comforting smile I remembered from all those years ago. "How are you, David?" she asked, her voice soft and youthful, as if time hadn't passed. "I'm okay, Mrs. Polino," I mumbled, "just having trouble making myself walk up the steps." She gave a soft chuckle. "I had the same problem when I got here," she said. "It's not as bad inside as you think." "Really?" She stepped even closer and wrapped her arms around me, gently pulling me into a hug. The mother of my best friend, gone too soon, was now holding me, trying to offer comfort. I knew it was just kindness, but all I could think about was how warm she felt. Embarrassingly, I felt a flood of emotions, even arousal, and I couldn't believe that after all these years, I still had feelings for her. But more than anything, I was shocked to realize that I could still feel anything at all. That alone brought some small sense of relief. "Thank you," I whispered into her hair. "You don't know what Manny meant to me. I'm just so sorry he's gone. I miss him." We stood there in silence, holding each other, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I might actually have the strength to walk through that door and face what was inside. Slowly, she let go and looked into my eyes. "David, I have to ask you something before we go in," she said, her expression curious. "And I need an honest answer." "Of course," I replied. "Ask me anything." She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Yesterday, a lawyer came to my door. She introduced herself and gave me an envelope. Inside, there was information about a trust fund. Someone set up a fund in my son's name for Joshua. The trust is worth $1 million, David." I asked the lawyer who was behind it, but she said the donor was anonymous. My question is, did you have anything to do with it? Did you set up that trust fund? I looked her in the eyes and told the best lie I've ever told. "No, ma'am," I said, shaking my head. "I don't know anything about it." She studied my face for a moment, and I could tell she knew I wasn't telling the truth. But after a second, her expression softened, and she gave me that same beautiful smile she always had. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't let on that I knew she could see through me. I just smiled back. "You probably don't know," she continued, "but I'm Josh's legal guardian now. Manny was sick for 3 years, and before he passed, we arranged for me to adopt him. So now, my grandson is legally my son. I'll use the trust fund to make sure he gets the best education. He wants to be a doctor, you know. He says he wants to find a cure for the disease that took his dad." I smiled. "That's amazing, Anna," I corrected myself, remembering her earlier request to call her by her first name. She smiled wider. "That's better," she said, gently stroking my cheek. "Are you ready to go inside now?" I took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, I think I am. Will you walk with me?" She turned toward the door, linked her arm through mine, and guided me up the steps that had seemed impossible just moments before. Once inside, a man approached her, letting her know they were ready to begin the service. She turned to me, kissed my cheek, and said, "Please stay afterward. I'd like to talk more, and I want you to meet Josh. He's a good kid, and I think you'll really like him." With that, she disappeared into the crowd, pointing me toward the guest book. I signed it and found a seat near the back of the room, close to the exit. The woman next to me offered me a box of tissues, which I gratefully accepted. I took a handful, knowing I'd need them. A few minutes later, everyone sat down, and a young man stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for being here today. We're here to honor the life of Manuel Manny Polino. We all know how he passed, how he struggled against that cruel disease. But today isn't about that. Today, we celebrate how he lived." The speaker paused for a moment, his voice steady but emotional. "Manny was one of the kindest, most genuine souls I've ever met. He had a way of making everyone around him feel welcome, no matter the circumstances. He never put on airs. And in fact, none of us even called him by his given name. He was always just Manny." That's when it hit me. I grabbed the tissues and pressed them to my face, trying to hold back the sobs. But I couldn't. I cried for Manny, for everything that had happened, and for the long, painful road I'd traveled to get here.